Pistol Politics by Robert Howard. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Pistol Politics by Robert Howard. Politics and book learning is bad enough took separate. Together, they're a blight and a curse. Take Yeller Dog, for a instance, a mining camp over in the Apache River country, where I was rash enough to take up my abode in onst. Yeller Dog was a decent camp till politics reared its head in our midst and education come slithering after. The whiskey was good and middlin' cheap. The poker and faro games was honest if you watched the dealers clost. 3 or 4 piddlin' fights a night was the usual run, and a man hadn't been shot dead in more'n a week by my reckoning. Then, like my Aunt Tascosa Polk would say, come the deluge. It all begun when 40 Rod Harrigan moved his gamblin' outfit over to Alderville and left our one frame buildin' vacant. And Gooseneck Wilkerson got the idea of turning it into a city hall. Then he said we ought to have a mayor to go with it, and announced hisself as candidate. Naturally, Bull Hawkins, our other leading citizen, come out agin him. The election was sought for April 11. Gooseneck established his campaign headquarters in the Silver Saddle Saloon, and Bull taken up his'n in the Red Tomahawk on t'other side of the street. First thing we knowed, Yeller Dog was in the grip of politics. The campaign got underway, and the casualties was mounting daily, as public interest become more and more fatally aroused. And on the afternoon of the 9th, Gooseneck come into his headquarters and says, "We got to make a sweepin' offensive, boys. Bull Hawkins is out-generalin' us. That shootin' match he put on for a prime beef steer yesterday made a big hit with a common herd. He's tryin' to convince Yeller Dog that if elected, he'd purvide the camp with more high-class amusement than I could. Breck Elkins, will you pause in your guzzlin' and listen here a minute? As chief of this here political organization, I demand your attention." "I hear you," I says. "I was to the match, and they barred me on a technicality. Otherwise I would have won the whole steer. It weren't so excitin' far as I could see. Only one man got shot." "And he was one of my voters," scowled Gooseneck. "But we got to outshine Bull's efforts to seduce the mob. He's resortin' to low, underhanded tactics by buyin' votes outright. I scorn sech measures. Anyway, I've bought all I'm able to pay for. We got to put on a show which outdazzles his dern shootin' match." "A rodeo, maybe," suggested Mule McGrath. "Or a good dog fight." Nah," says Gooseneck. "My show will be a symbol of progress and culture. We stages a spellin' match tomorrow night in the city hall. Next mornin', when the polls opens, the voters'll still be so dazzled by the grandeur of our entertainment they'll elect me by a vast majority." "How many men in this here camp can spell good enough to get into a spellin' bee?" says I. "I'm confident they's at least 35 men in this camp which can read and write," says Gooseneck. "That's plenty. But we gotta find somebody to give out the words. It wouldn't look right for me. It'd be beneath my official dignity. Who's educated enough for the job?" "I am," says Jerry Brennan and Bill Garrison simultaneous. Then they showed their teeth at each other. They weren't friends nohow. "Can't but one get the job," asserted Gooseneck. "I tests your ability. Can either one of you spell Constantinople?" "K-O-N," begun Garrison, and Brennan burst into a loud and mocking guffaw. and said something pointed about ignoramuses. "You deleted expletive," says Garrison bloodthirstily. "Gentlemen," squawked Gooseneck, and then ducked as they both went for their guns. They cleared Leather about the same time. When the smoke oozed away, Gooseneck crawled out from under the roulette table and cussed fervently. "Two more reliable voters gone to glory," he raged. "Breckinridge, why didn't you stop 'em?" "'Twarn't none of my business," says I, reaching for another drink, 'cause a stray bullet had knocked my glass out of my hand. "Hey," I addressed the barkeep sternly, "I see you fixin' to chalk up that there spilt drink agin me. Charge it to Jerry Brennan. He spilt it." "Dead men pays no bills," complained the bartender. "Cease them petty squabbles," snarled Gooseneck. "You argies over a glass of liquor when I've just lost two good votes. Drag 'em out, boys," he ordered the other members of the organization, which was emerging from behind the bar and the whiskey barrels where they took refuge when the shooting started. "Damn," says Gooseneck with bitterness. "This here is a deadly lick to my campaign. I not only loses two more votes, but them was the best educated men in camp outside of me. Now who we gonna get to conduct the spelling match?" "Anybody which can read can do it," says Lobo Harrison, a hoss thief with a mean face and an ingrown disposition. He'd go a mile out of his way just to kick a dog. "Even Elkins there could do it." "Yeah, if they was anything to read from," snorted Gooseneck. "But they ain't a line of writing in camp except on whiskey bottles. We got to have a man with a lot of long words in his head. Breckinridge, damn it, just 'cause I told the barkeep to charge your drinks on the campaign expenses ain't no reason for you to freeze onto that bar permanent. Ride over to Alderville and get us an educated man." "How'll he know whether he's educated or not?" sneered Lobo, which seemed to dislike me passionately for some reason or another. "Make him spell Constantinople," says Gooseneck. "He can't go over there," says Soapy Jackson. "The folks has threatened to lynch him for crippling their sheriff." "I didn't cripple their fool sheriff," I says indignantly. "He crippled hisself, falling through a wagon wheel when I give him a kind of push with a rock. How you spell that there Constance Hopel word?" Well, he spelled it 30 or 40 times till I had it memorized. So I rode over to Alderville. When I rode into town, the folks looked at me coldly and bunched up and whispered amongst themselves. But I paid no attention to 'em. I never seen the deputy sheriff, unless that was him I seen climbing a white oak tree as I hove in sight. I went into the White Eagle saloon and drank me a dram and says to the barkeep, "Who's the best educated man in Alderville?" Says he, "Snake River Murgatroyd, which deals Monty over to the Elite Amusement Palace." So I went over there, and just as I went through the door I happened to remember that Snake River had swore he was going to shoot me on sight next time he seen me, on account of some trouble we'd had over a card game. But such things is too trivial to bother about. I went up to where he was setting dealing Monty, and I says, "Hey." "Place your bet," says he. Then he looked up and said, "You! Expletive deleted!" and reached for his gun. But I got mine out first and shoved the muzzle under his nose. "Spell Constantinople," I tells him. He turned pale and said, "Are you crazy?" "Spell it," I roared. And he says, "Constantinople. What the hell?" "Good," I said, throwing his gun in the corner out of temptation's way. "We wants you to come over to Yeller Dog and give out words at a spelling match." Everybody in the place was holding their breath. Snake River moved his hands nervous-like and knocked a jack of diamonds off onto the floor. He stooped like he was going to pick it up, but instead he jerked a bowie out of his boot and tried to stab me in the belly. Well, much as I would have enjoyed shooting him, I knowed he'd spiled a spelling match, so merely taken the knife away from him and held him upside down to shake out whatever other weapons he might have hid, and he began to holler, Help! Murder! Elkins is killing me!" "It's a yaller dog plot!" somebody howled, and the next instant the air was full of beer mugs and cuspidors. Some of them spittoons was quite heavy, and when one missed me and went bong on Snake River's head, he curled up like a angleworm which has been tromped on. "Look at there!" they hollered, like it was my fault. "He's trying to kill Snake River! Get him, boys!" They then fell on me with billiard sticks and chair legs in a way which has made me suspicious of Alderville's hospitality ever since. Argument being useless, I tucked Snake River under my left arm and started knocking them fool critters right and left with my right fist, and I reckon that was how the bar got wrecked. I never seen a bar a man's head would go through easier than that one. So pretty soon the survivors abandoned the fray and run out of the door hollering, "Help! Murder! Rise up, citizens! Yeller dog is at our throats! Rise and defend your homes and loved ones!" You would have thought the Apaches was burning the town, the way folks was hollering and running for their guns and shooting at me, as I clumb aboard Captain Kidd and headed for Yeller Dog. I left the main road and headed through the bresh for an old trail I knowed about, 'cause I seen a whole army of men getting on their hosses to lick out after me, and while I knowed they couldn't catch Captain Kidd, I was afeared they might hit Snake River with a stray bullet if they got within range. The bresh was pretty thick, and I reckon it was the branches slapping him in the face which brung him to, because all to once he begun hollerin' blue murder. "You ain't taking me to Yeller Dog," he yelled. "You're taking me out in the hills to murder me. Help! Help!" "Ah, shut up," I snorted. "This here's a shortcut." "You can't get across Apache River unless you follow the road to the bridge," says he. "I can too," I says. "We'll go across on the footbridge." With that he gave a scream of horror and a convulsive wrench which tore himself clean out of his shirt which I was holding on to. Next thing I knowed, all I had in my hand was an empty shirt, and he was on the ground and scuttling through the bushes. I'd taken in after him, but he was pretty tricky dodging around stumps and trees, and I begun to believe I was going to have to shoot him in the hind leg to catch him, when he made the mistake of trying to climb a tree. I rode up onto him before he could get out of reach, and reached up and got him by the leg and pulled him down, and his language was painful to hear. It was his own fault he slipped out of my hand, he kicked so violent. I didn't go to drop him on his head, but just as I was retching down for him I heard hosses running, and looked up, and here come that derned Alderville posse busting through the bresh right onto me. I'd lost so much time chasing Snake River they'd catched up with me. So I scooped him up and hung him over my saddle horn, because he was out cold, and headed for Apache River. Captain Kidd drawed away from them hosses like they was hobbled, so they weren't scarcely in pistol range of us when we busted out on the east bank. The river was up, just a foamin' and a bilin', and the footbridge warn't nothing only just a log. But Captain Kidd's sure-footed as a billy goat. We started across it, and everything went all right till we got about the middle of it, and then Snake River come to and seen the water booming along under us. He lost his head and began to struggle and kick and holler, and his spurs scratched Captain Kidd's hide. That made Captain Kidd mad, and he turned his head and tried to bite my leg, 'cause he always blames me for everything that happens, and he lost his balance and fell off. That would have been all right too, because as we hit the water I got hold of Captain Kidd's tail with one hand and Snake River's undershirt with the other, and Captain Kidd hit out for the west bank. They's very few streams he can't swim, flood or not. But just as we was nearly across, the posse appeared on the hind bank and started shooting at me, and they was apparently in some doubt as to which head in the water was me, because some of 'em shot at Snake River too, just to make sure. He opened his mouth to holler at 'em and got it full of water, and dern near strangled. Then all to onct somebody in the bresh on the west shore opened up with a Winchester, and one of the posse hollered, "Look out, boys! It's a trap! Elkins has led us into an ambush." They turned round and hightailed it for Alderville. Well, what with the shooting and a gullet full of water, Snake River was having a regular fit, and he kicked and thrashed so he kicked himself clean out of his undershirt, and just as my feet hit bottom, he slipped out of my grip and went whirling off downstream. I jumped out on land, ignoring the hearty kick Captain Kidd planted in my midriff, and grabbed my lariat off my saddle. Gooseneck Wilkerson come prancing out of the brush, waving a Winchester and yelling, "Don't let him drown, dang yer! My whole campaign depends on that spelling bee. Do something!" I run along the bank and made a throw, and looped Snake River round the ears. It warn't a very good catch, but the best I could do under the circumstances, and skin'll always grow back onto a man's ears. I hauled him out of the river, and it was plumb ungrateful for him to accuse me later of dragging him over them sharp rocks on purpose. I like to know how he figured I could rope him out of a patchy river without skinning him up a little. He'd swallered so much water he was nigh at his last gasp. Gooseneck rolled him onto his belly and jumped up and down on his back with both feet to get the water out. Gooseneck said that was artificial respiration, but from the way Snake River hollered, I don't believe it done him much good. Anyway, he choked up several gallons of water. When he was able to threaten our lives betwixt cuss words, Gooseneck says, "Git him on your hoss and let's git started. Mine run off when the shooting started. I jest suspected you'd be pursued by them dumb wits and would take the short cut. That's why I come to meet you. Come on, we gotta get Snake River some medical attention. In his present state, he ain't in no shape to conduct no spelling match." Snake River was too groggy to set in the saddle, so we hung him across it like a cowhide over a fence and started out, me leading Captain Kidd. It makes Captain Kidd very mad to have anybody but me on his back, so we hadn't went more'n a mile when he retched around and sawed his teeth in the seat of Snake River's pants. Snake River'd been groaning very weak and dismal and commanding us to stop and let him down so's he could utter his last words, but when Captain Kidd bid him, he let out a remarkable strong yell and bust into language unfit for a dying man. "Expletive deleted!" quoth he passionately. "Why have I got to be butchered for a yeller dog holiday?" We was reasoning with him when old man Jake Hansen hove out of the bushes. Old Jake had a cabin 100 yards back from the trail. He was about the width of a barn door, and his whiskers was marvelous to behold. "What's this ungodly noise about?" he demanded. "Who's getting murdered?" "I am," says Snake River fiercely. "I'm being sacrificed to the passions of the brutal mob." "You shut up," said Gooseneck severely. "Jake, this is the gent we've consented to let conduct the spelling match." "Well, well," says Jake, interested. "A educated man, hey? Why, he don't look no different from us folks if the blood were wiped off of him. Say, listen, boys. Bring him over to my cabin. I'll dress his wounds and feed him and take care of him and get him to the city hall tomorrow night in time for the spelling match. In the meantime, he can teach my daughter Salome her letters." "I refuse to tutor a dirty-faced cub," began Snake River when he seen a face peeking eagerly at us from the trees. "Who's that?" he demanded. "My daughter Salome," said old Jake. 19 her last birthday, and can't neither read nor write. None of my folks ever could, far back as family history goes, but I want her to get some education." "It's a human obligation," says Snake River. "I'll do it." So we left him at Jake's cabin, propped up on a bunk with Salome, feeding him spoon vittles and whiskey, and me and Gooseneck headed for Yeller Dog, which warn't hardly a mile from there. Gooseneck says to me, "We won't say nothing about Snake River being at Jake's shack. Bull Hawkins is sweet on Salome, and he's so dern jealous-minded it makes him mad for another man to even stop there to say hello to the folks. We don't want nothing to interfere with our show." "You act like you got a lot of confidence in it," I says. "I banks on it heavy," says he. "It's a symbol of civilization." Well, just as we come into town, we met Mule McGrath with fire in his eye and corn juice on his breath. "Gooseneck, listen," says he. "I just got wind of a plot of Hawkins and Jack Clanton to get a lot of our voters so drunk election day they won't be able to get to the polls. Let's call off the spelling match and go over the Red Tomahawk and clean out that rat nest." "Nah," says Gooseneck. "We promised the mob a show and we keeps our word. Don't worry, I'll think of a way to circumvent the heathen." Mule headed back for the Silver Saddle, shaking his head, and Gooseneck sat down on the edge of a hoss trough and thunk deeply. I'd begun to think he'd drapped off to sleep when he riz up and said, "Breck, get hold of Soapy Jackson and tell him to sneak out of camp and stay hid till the morning of the 11th. Then he's to ride in just before the polls open and spread the news that they has been a big gold strike over in Wild Ross Gulch. A lot of fellers'll stampede for there without waiting to vote. Meanwhile, you'll have circulated amongst the men you know are going to vote for me and let 'em know we are going to work this campaign strategy, with all my men in camp and most of Bull's heading for Wild Ross Gulch. Right and justice triumphs, and I win." So I went and found Soapy and told him what Gooseneck said, and on the strength of it he immediately headed for the Silver Saddle and began guzzling on campaign credit. I felt it was my duty to go along with him and see he didn't get so full he forgot what he was supposed to do, and we was putting down the 6th dram apiece when in come Jack McDonald, Jim Leary, and Tarantula Allison, all Hawkins men. Soapy focused his wandering eyes on 'em and says, "Who's this here cluttering up the scenery? Why'n't you mavericks stay over to the Red Tomahawk where you belong?" "It's a free country," asserted Jack McDonald. "What about this here derned spelling match Gooseneck's bragging about all over town?" "Well, what about it?" I demanded, hitching my harness forward. "The political foe don't live which can beard a Elkins in his lair." "We demands to know who conducts it," stated Leary. "At least half the men in camp eligible to compete is in our crowd. We demands fair play." "We're bringing in a cultured gent from another town," I says coldly. "Who?" demanded Allison. "None of your dang business," trumpeted Soapy, which gets delusions of valor when he's full of liquor. "As a champion of progress and civic pride, I challenges the skunk-odored forces of corrupt politics and—" Bam! McDonald swung with a billiard ball and Soapy kissed the sawdust. "Now look what you done," I says peevishly. "If you coyotes can't act like gents, you'll oblige me by getting to hell out of here. If you don't like our company, suppose you tries to put us out," they challenged. So when I finished my drink, I taken their weapons away from 'em and throwed 'em head first out the side door. How was I to know somebody had just put up a new cast iron hitching rack out there? Their friends carried 'em over to the Red Tomahawk to sew up their sculps, and I went back into the silver saddle to see if Soapy had come to yet. Just as I reached the door, he come weaving out, muttering in his whiskers and waving his six-shooter. "Do you remember what all I told you?" I demanded. "Some of it," he goggled, with his glassy eyes wobbling in all directions. "Well, get going then," I urged, and helped him up onto his hoss. He left town at full speed, with both feet out of the stirrups and both arms around the hoss's neck. "Drink is a curse and a delusion," I told the barkeep in disgust. "Look at that sickening example and take warning. Give me a bottle of rye." Well, Gooseneck done a good job of advertising the show. By the middle of the next afternoon, men was pouring into town from claims all up and down the creek. Half an hour before the match was sought to begin, the hall was full. The benches was moved back from the front part, leaving a space clear all the way across the hall. There had been a lot of argument about who was to compete and who was to choose sides, but when it was finally settled, as satisfactory as anything ever was settled in Yaller Dog, they was 20 men to compete, and Lobo Harrison and Jack Clanton was to choose up. By a peculiar coincidence, half of that 20 men was goosenecks, and half was bulls. So naturally Lobo choosed his pals, and Clanton choosed his'n. "I don't like this," Gooseneck whispered to me. "I'd ruther they'd been mixed up. This is beginning to look like a contest between my gang and Bull's. If they win, it's gonna make me look cheap. Where the hell is Snake River?" "I ain't seen him," I said. "You ought to have made 'em take off their guns." "Shucks," says he. "What could possibly stir up trouble at such a ladylike affair as a spelling bee? Dang it, where is Snake River? Old Jake said he'd get him here on time." "Hey, Gooseneck!" yelled Bull Hawkins from where he sat amongst his cohorts. "Why don't you start the show?" Bull was a big, broad-shouldered hombre with black mustaches like a walrus. The crowd began to holler and cuss and stomp their feet, and this pleased Bull very much. "Keep 'em amused," hissed Gooseneck. "I'll go look for Snake River." He snuck out a side door, and I riz up and addressed the throng. "Gents," I said, "be patient. They is a slight delay, but it won't be long. Meantime, I'll be glad to entertain you all to the best of my ability. Would you like to hear me sing Barbary Allen?" "No, by grab!" they answered in one beller. "Why, you're going to!" I roared, infuriated by this callous lack of the finer feelings. "I will now sing," I says, drawing my .45s, "and I blows the brains out of the first coyote which tries to interrupt me." I then sung my song without interference, and when I was through I bowed and waited for the applause. But all I heard was Lobo Harrison saying, "Imagine what the poor wolves on Bear Creek has to put up with." This cut me to the quick, but before I could make a suitable reply, Gooseneck slid in, breathing heavy. "I can't find Snake River," he hissed, "but the barkeep give me a book he found somewheres. Most of the leaves is tore out, but there's plenty left. I've marked some of the longest words, Breck. You can read good enough to give 'em out. You got to. If we don't start the show right away, this mob'll wreck the place. You're the only man not in the match which can even read a little, outside of me and Bull. It wouldn't look right for me to do it, and I sure ain't gonna let Bull run my show." I knew I was licked. "Ah, well, all right," I said. "I might 'a' knew I'd be the goat. Gimme the book." "Here it is," he said. "The Adventures of a French Countess. Be darned sure you don't give out no words except them I marked." "Hey!" bawled Jack Clanton. We're getting tired standing up here. Open the ball." "All right," I says. We commences. "Hey," says Bill, "nobody told us Elkins was going to conduct the ceremony. We was told a cultured gent from out of town was to do it." "Well," I says irritably, "Bear Creek is my home range, and I reckon I'm as cultured as any snake hunter here. If anybody thinks he's better qualified than me, step up whilst I stomp his ears off." Nobody volunteered. So I says, "All right." I tosses $1 to see who gets the first word. It fell for Harrison's gang, so I looked in the book at the first word marked, and it was a gal's name. "Catherine," I says. Nobody said nothing. "Catherine!" I roared, glaring at Lobo Harrison. "What you looking at me for?" he demanded. "I don't know no gal by that name." "Expletive deleted," I says with passion. "That's the word I give out. Spell it, damn it." "Oh," says he. "All right. Katharinn. "That's wrong," I says. "What you mean wrong?" he roared. "That's right." "'Tain't according to the book," I says. "Dang the book," says he. "I know my rights, and I ain't to be euchred by no ignorant grizzly from Bear Creek." "Who you callin' ignorant?" I demanded, stung. "Set down. You spelled it wrong." "You lie!" he howled, and went for his gun. But I fired first. When the smoke cleared away, I seen everybody was on their feet preparing for the stampede, such as weren't trying to crawl under the benches. So I said, "Set down, everybody. There ain't nothing to get excited about. The spelling match continues, and I'll shoot the first scoundrel which tries to leave the hall before the entertainment's over." Gooseneck hissed fiercely at me.
"Damn it, be careful who you shoot, can't you? That was another one of my voters."
"Drag him out," I commanded, wiping off some blood where a slug had notched my ear. "The spelling match is ready to commence again." There was a kind of tension in the air, men shuffling their feet and twisting their mustaches and hitching their gun belts. But I give no heed. I now approached the other side with my hand on my pistol, and says to Clanton, "Can you spell Catharine?" "Catharine," says he. "Right, by golly," I says, consulting the French countess, and the audience cheered wildly and shot off their pistols into the roof. "Hey," says Bill Stark on the other side, "that's wrong. Make him sit down. It spells with a K." "He spelt it just like it is in the book," I says. "Look for yourself." "I don't give a damn," he yelled, rudely knocking the French countess out of my hand. "It's a misprint. It spells with a K, or there'll be more blood on the floor. He spelt it wrong, and if he don't set down, I shoots him down." "I'm running this show," I bellered, beginning to get mad. "You gotta shoot me before you shoots anybody else." "With pleasure," snarled he, and went for his gun. Well, I hit him on the jaw with my fist, and he went to sleep amongst the wreckage of busted benches. Gooseneck jumped up with a maddened shriek.
"Dang your soul, Breckinridge!" he squalled. "Quit canceling my votes. Who are you working for, me or Hawkins?"
"Haw, haw, haw!" bellered Hawkins. "Go on with the show. This is the funniest thing I ever seen." Wham! The door crashed open and in pranced old Jake Hansen, waving a shotgun. "Welcome to the festivities, Jake," I greeted him. "Where's—" "You son of a skunk!" quoth he, and let go at me with both barrels. The shot scattered remarkable. I didn't get more than 5 or 6 of 'em, and the rest distributed freely amongst the crowd. You ought to 'a' heard 'em holler. The folks, I mean, not the buckshot.
What in tarnation are you doing? Shrieked Gooseneck. Where's Snake River?
Gone, howled old Jake. Run off. Eloped with my daughter. Bull Hawkins riz with a howl of anguish, convulsively clutching his whiskers. Salome, he bellered. Eloped with a cussed gambolier they brung over from Alderville, bleated old Jake, doing a war dance in his passion. Elkins and Wilkerson persuaded me to take that snake into my bosom. In spite of my pleas and protests, they forced him into my peaceful, expletive-deleted household, and he stole the poor mutton-headed innocent's blasted heart with his cultured airs and his slick talk. They've run off to get married. It's a political plot, shrieked Hawkins, going for his gun. Wilkerson done it a purpose. I shot the gun out of his hand, but Jack Clanton crashed a bench down on Gooseneck's head, and Gooseneck kissed the floor. Clanton come down on top of him, out cold, as Mule McGrath swung with a pistol butt, and the next instant somebody lammed Mule with a brick bat, and he flopped down against Clanton, and then the fight was on. Them rival political factions just kinda riz up and rolled together in a wave of profanity, gun smoke, and splintering benches. I have always noticed that the best thing to do in such cases is to keep your temper, and that's what I did for some time, in spite of the efforts of 9 or 10 wild-eyed Hawkinites. I didn't even shoot one of 'em. I kept my head and battered their skulls with a joist I tore out of the floor, and when I knocked 'em down, I didn't stomp on 'em hardly any. But they kept coming, and Jack McDonald was obsessed with the notion that he could ride me to the floor by jumping up astraddle of my neck. So he done it, and having discovered his idea was a hallucination, he got a fistful of my hair with his left and started beating me in the head with his pistol barrel. It was very annoying. Simultaneous, several other misfits got hold of my legs, trying to wrestle me down, and some son of Belial stomped severely on my toe. I had bore my afflictions as patient as Job up to that time, but this perfidy maddened me. I give a roar which loosened the shingles on the roof, and kicked the toe stomper in the belly with such fury that he curled up on the floor with a holler groan and taken no more interest in the proceedings. I likewise busted my timber on somebody's skull, and retched up and pulled Jack McDonald off my neck like pulling a tick off a bull's hide, and hev him through a convenient winder. He's a liar when he says I aimed him deliberate at that rain barrel. I didn't even know they was a rain barrel till I heard his head crash through the staves. I then shook 9 or 10 idiots loose from my shoulders and shook the blood out of my eyes, and perceived that Gooseneck's men was getting the worst of it, particularly including Gooseneck himself. So I give another roar and prepared to wade through them fool Hawkinites like a bar through a pack of hound dogs, when I discovered that some perfidious sidewinder had got my spur tangled in his whiskers. I stooped to untangle myself just as a charge of buckshot ripped through the air where my head had been an instant before. 3 or 4 critters was rushing me with bowie knives, so I give a wrench and tore loose by main force. How could I help it if most of the whiskers come loose too? I grabbed me a bench to use for a club, and I mowed the whole first rank down with one swipe, and then as I drawed back for another lick, I heard somebody yelling above the melee. "Gold!" he shrieked. Everybody stopped like they was froze in their tracks. Even Bull Hawkins shook the blood out of his eyes and glared up from where he was kneeling on Gooseneck's wishbone with one hand in Gooseneck's hair and a buoy in the other'n. Everybody quit fighting everybody else and looked at the door. And there was Soapy Jackson, a reelin' and a weavin' with a empty bottle in one hand and hollerin', "Big gold strike in Wild Hoss Gulch," he blats. "Biggest the West ever seen. Nuggets the size of ostrich eggs." Gulp. He disappeared in a wave of frenzied humanity as Yeller Dog's population abandoned the fray and headed for the wide open spaces. Even Hawkins ceased his efforts to sculp Gooseneck alive and joined the stampede. They tore the whole front out of the city hall in their flight, and even them which had been knocked stiff come to at the howl of "Gold" and staggered wildly after the mob, shrieking pitifully for their picks, shovels, and jackasses. When the dust had settled and the thunder of boot heels had faded in the distance, the only human left in the city hall was me and Gooseneck and Soapy Jackson, which riz unsteadily with the prints of hobnails all over his homely face. They sure trampled him free and generous in their rush. Gooseneck staggered up, glared wildly about him, and went into convulsions. At first he couldn't talk at all. He just frothed at the mouth. When he found speech, his language was shocking. "What you spring at this time of night for?" he howled. "Breckinridge, I said to tell him to bring the news in the morning, not tonight." "I did tell him that," I says.
"Oh, so that was what I couldn't remember," says Soapy. "That lick MacDonald give me so plumb addled my brains. I knowed there was something I forgot, but couldn't remember what it was." "Oh, solo mio," gibbered Gooseneck, or words to that effect. "Well, what you kicking about?" I demanded, peevishly, having just discovered that somebody'd stabbed me in the hind leg during the melee. My boot was full of blood, and they was brand new boots. "It worked, didn't it?" I says. "They're all headed for Wild Hoss Gulch, including Hawkins hisself, and they can't possibly get back afore day after tomorrow." "Yeah," raved Gooseneck. "They're all gone, including my gang. The damn camp's empty. How can I get elected with nobody here to hold the election and nobody to vote?" "Oh," I says, "that's right. I hadn't thunk of that." He fixed me with an awful eye. "Did you," says he in a blood-curdling voice, "did you tell my voters Soapy was going to enact a political strategy?" "By golly," I said, "you know it plumb slipped my mind. Ain't that a joke on me?" "Get out of my life," says Gooseneck, drawing his gun. That was a genteel way for him to act, trying to shoot me after all I'd done for him. I'd taken his gun away from him as gentle as I knowed how, and it was his own fault he got his arm broke. But to hear him rave, you would have thought he considered I was to blame for his misfortunes or something. I was so darn disgusted, I clumb on to Cap'n Kidd and shaken the dust of that there camp off of my boots, 'cause I seen they was no gratitude in Yeller Dog. I likewise seen I wasn't cut out for the skullduggery of politics. I had me a notion one time that I'd make a sheriff, but I learnt my lesson. It's like my pap says, I reckon. "All the law a man needs," says he, "is a gun tucked into his pants. And the main larnin' he needs is to know which end of that gun the bullet comes out of. What's good enough for pap, gents, is good enough for me."
End of pistol politics. Evil Deeds at Red Cougar by Robert Howard. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Evil Deeds at Red Cougar by Robert Howard. I've been accused of prejudice agin the town of Red Cougar on account of my habit of avoiding it if I have to ride 50 miles out'n my way to keep from going through there. I denies the slander. It ain't no more prejudiced for me to ride around Red Cougar than it is for a lobo to keep his paw out of a jump trap. My experiences in that there lair of iniquity is painful to recall. I was a stranger and took in. I was a sheep for the fleecin', and if some of the fleecers got their fingers ketched in the shears, it was their own fault. If I shuns Red Cougar like a plague, that makes it mutual, because the inhabitants of Red Cougar shuns me with equal enthusiasm, even to the pint of desertin' their wagons and taking to the bresh if they happen to meet me on the road. I warn't intending to go there in the first place. I been punchin' cows over in Utah and was headin' for Bear Creek with the $50 a draw poker game had left me out of my wages. When I seen a trail branchin' off of the main road, I knowed it turned off to Red Cougar, but it didn't make no impression on me. But I hadn't gone far past it when I heard a hoss runnin', and the next thing it busted round a bend in the road with foam flyin' from the bit rings. They was a gal on it, lookin' back over her shoulder down the road. Just as she rounded the turn, her hoss stumbled and went to its knees, throwin' her over its head. I was off of Cap'n Kidd in an instant and ketched her hoss before it could run off. I helped her up and she grabbed holt of me and hollered, "Don't let 'em get me!" "Who?" I said, taking off my hat with one hand and drawing a .45 with the other. "A gang of desperadoes," she panted. "They've chased me for 5 miles. Oh, please, don't let them get me." "They'll tetch you over my dead carcass," I assured her. She give me a look which made my heart turn somersets. She had black curly hair and big innocent gray eyes, and she was the purtiest gal I'd seen in a coon's age. "Oh, thank you," she panted. "I knowed you was a gent the minute I seen you. Will you help me up onto my hoss?" "You shore you ain't hurt none?" I asked, and she said she warn't. So I helped her up, and she gathered up her reins and looked back down the road very nervous. "Don't let 'em foller me," she begged. "I'm going on." "You don't need to do that," I says. "Wait till I exterminate them scoundrels and I'll escort you home." But she started convulsively as the distant pound of hoofs reached us, and said, "Oh, I dast not. They mustn't even see me again." "But I want to," I said. "Where you live?" "Red Cougar," says she. "My name's Sue Pritchard. If you happen up that way, drop in." "I'll be there," I promised, and she flashed me a dazzling smile and loped on down the road and out of sight up the Red Cougar trail. So I set to work. I uses a rope wove out of buffalo hide, a right smart longer and thicker and stronger than the average riata, because a man my size has got to have a rope to match. I tied said lariat across the road about 3 foot off the ground. Then I backed Cap'n Kidd into the bushes, and pretty soon 6 men swept around the bend. The first hoss fell over my rope and the others fell over him, and the way they piled up in the road was beautiful to behold. Before you could bat your eye, they was a most amazin' tangle of kickin' hosses and cussin' men. I chose that instant to ride out of the brush and throw my pistols down on 'em. "Cease that scandalous language and rise with your hands up," I requested, and they done so, but not cheerfully. Some had been kicked right severe by the hosses, and one had pitched over his cayuse's neck and lit on his head, and his conversation weren't no ways sensible. "What's the meaning of this here hold up?" demanded a tall maverick with long yaller whiskers. "Shut up," I told him sternly. "Men which chases a helpless gal like a pack of Injuns ain't fittin' for to talk to a white man." "Oh, so that's it," says he. "Well, let me tell you." "I said shut up," I roared, emphasizing my request by shooting the left tip off of his mustache. "I don't aim to powwow with no dern women chasing coyotes. In my country we decorate a live oak with your carcasses." "But you don't," began one of the others, but Yaller Whiskers profanely told him to shut up. "Don't you see he's one of Ridgway's men?" snarled he. "He's got the drop on us, but our turn'll come. Till it does, save your breath." "That's good advice," I says. "Unbuckle your gun belts and hang 'em on your saddle horns, and keep your hands away from them guns whilst you does it. I'd plumb welcome an excuse to salivate the whole mob of you." So they done it. Then I fired a few shots under the hosses' feet and stampeded 'em, and they run off down the road the direction they come from. Yaller Whiskers and his pals cussed something terrible. "Better save your wind," I advised 'em. "You likely got a good long walk ahead of you before you catches your cayuses." "I'll have your heart's blood for this," raved Yaller Whiskers. "I'll have your sculp if I have to trail you from here to Judgment Day. You don't know who you're monkeying with." "And I don't care," I snorted. "Vamoose!" They taken out down the road after their hosses, and I shot around their feet a few times to kind of speed 'em on their way. They disappeared down the road in a faint blue haze of profanity, and I turned around and headed for Red Cougar. I hoped to catch up with Miss Pritchett before she got to Red Cougar, but she had too good a start and was going too fast a gait. My heart pounded at the thought of her, and my corns begun to ache. It sure was love at first sight. Well, I'd followed the trail for maybe 3 miles when I heard guns banging ahead of me. A little bit later I come to where the trail forked, and I didn't know which'n led to Red Cougar. Whilst I was setting there wondering which branch to take, I heard hosses running again, and pretty soon a couple of men hove into sight, spurring hard and bending low like they was expecting to be shot from behind. When they approached me, I seen they had badges onto their vests and bullet holes in their hats. "Which is the road to Red Cougar?" I asked politely. "That'n," says the older feller, pinting back the way they'd come. "But if you're aiming to go there, I advises you to reflect deeply on the matter. Ponder, young man, ponder and meditate. Life is sweet after all." "What you mean?" I asked. "Who y'all chasing?" "Chasing, hell!" says he, polishing his sheriff's badge with his sleeve. "We're being chased. Buck Ridgway's in town." "Never heard of him," I says. "Well," says the sheriff, "Buck don't like strangers no more'n he does law officers, and you see how well he likes them." "This here's a free country," I snorted. "When I stays out of town on account of this here Ridgway or anybody else, there'll be ice in hell thick enough for the devil to skate on. I'm going to visit a young lady, Miss Sue Pritchard. Can you tell me where she lives?" They looked at me very peculiar, and the sheriff says, "Oh, in that case, well, she lives in the last cabin north of the general store on the left-hand side of the street." "Let's get going," urged his deputy nervously. "They may foller us." They started spurring again, and as I rode off I heard the deputy say, "Reckon he's one of 'em?" And the sheriff said, "If he ain't, He's the biggest damn fool that ever lived to come sparking Sue Pritchett." Then they rode out of hearing. I wondered who they was talking about, but soon forgot it as I rode on into Red Cougar. I come in on the south end of the town, and it was about like all them little mountain villages. One straggling street, hound dogs sleeping in the dust of the wagon ruts, and a general store and a couple of saloons. I seen some hosses tied at the hitching rack outside the biggest saloon, which said Mac's Bar on it, but I didn't see nobody on the streets, though noises of hilarity was coming out of the saloon. I was thirsty and dusty, and I decided I better have me a drink and spruce up some before I called on Miss Pritchard. So I watered Captain Kidd at the trough and tied him to a tree. If I'd tied him to the hitch rack, he'd have kicked the tar out of the other hosses, and went into the saloon. They warn't nobody in there but an old coot with gray whiskers tending bar, and the noise was all coming from another room. From the racket I jedged they was a bowlin' alley in there, and the gents was bowlin'. I beat the dust out of my pants with my hat and called for whiskey. Whilst I was drinking it, the feller said, "Stranger in town, eh?" I said I was, and he said, "Friend of Buck Ridgway's?" "Never seen him in my life," says I, and he says, "Then you better get out of town fast as you can dust it. Him and his bunch ain't here. He pulled out just a little while ago, but Jeff Middleton's in there, and Jeff's plenty bad." I started to tell him I weren't studying Jeff Middleton, but just then a lot of whooping bust out in the bowling alley like somebody'd made a tin strike or something, and here comes 6 men busting into the bar, whooping and yelling and slapping one of 'em on the back.
"Decorate the mahogany, McVeigh!"
they whooped.
"Jeff's buying. He just beat Tom Grissom here 6 straight games."
They surged up to the bar, and one of 'em tried to jostle me aside, but as nobody ain't been able to do that successful since I got my full growth, all he done was sprain his elbow. This seemed to irritate him, because he turned around and said heatedly, "What the hell you think you're doing?" "I'm drinking me a glass of corn squeezins," I replied coldly, and they all turned around and looked at me, and they moved back from the bar and hitched at their pistol belts. They was a hard-looking gang, and the fellow they called Middleton was the hardest-looking one of 'em. "Who are you, and where'd you come from?" he demanded. "None of your damn business," I replied with a touch of old Southern courtesy. He showed his teeth at this and fumbled at his gun belt. "Are you trying to start something?" he demanded, and I seen McVeigh hide behind a stack of beer kegs. "I ain't in the habit of starting trouble," I told him. "All I does is end it. I'm in here drinking me a quiet dram when you coyotes come surging in, hollering like you was the first critter which ever hit a pin." "So you depreciates my talents, eh?" he squalled like he was stung to the quick. "Maybe you think you could beat me, eh?" "I ain't seen the man which could hold a candle to my game," I replied with my usual modesty. "All right," he yelled, grinding his teeth. "Come into the alley, and I'll show you some action, you big mountain grizzly." "Hold on," says McVeigh, sticking his head up from behind the kegs. "Be careful, Jeff. I believe that's—" "I don't care who he is," raved Middleton. "He has give me a mortal insult. Come on, you, if you got the nerve." "You be careful with them insults," I roared menacingly, striding into the alley. "I ain't the man to be bulldozed." I was looking back over my shoulder when I shoved the door open with my palm, and I probably pushed harder than I intended to, and that's why I tore the door off of the hinges. They all looked kind of startled, and McVeigh give a despairing squeak, but I went on into the alley and picked up a bowl ball which I brandished in defiance. "Here's $50," I says, waving the greenbacks. "We puts up 50 each, and rolls for $5 a game. That suit you?" I couldn't understand what he said, because he just made a noise like a wolf grabbing a beefsteak, but he snatched up a bulldog and produced 10 $5 bills, so I judged it was agreeable with him. But he had an awful temper, and the longer we played, the madder he got. And when I beat him 5 straight games and taken 25 out of his 50, the veins stood out purple onto his temples. "It's your roll," I says, and he throwed his bowl ball down and yelled, "Blast your soul, I don't like your style. I'm through, and I'm taking down my stake. You gets no more of my money, damn you." "Why, you cheap-heeled piker," I roared. "I thought you was a sport, even if you was a hoss thief, but—" "Don't call me a hoss thief!" he screamed. "Well, cow thief then," I says, "if you're so dern particular." It was at this instant that he lost his head to the point of pulling a pistol and firing at me point blank. He would have undoubtedly shot me, too, if I hadn't hit him in the head with my bowl ball just as he fired. His bullet went into the ceiling, and his friends began to display their disapproval by throwing pins and bulldogs at me. This irritated me almost beyond control, but I kept my temper and taken a couple of 'em by the neck and beat their heads together till they was limp. The matter would have ended there without any violence, but the other 3 insisted on taking the thing serious, and I defy any man to remain tranquil when 3 hoss thieves are carving at him with buoys and beating him over the head with 10 pins. But I didn't intend to bust the big ceiling lamp. I just hit it by accident with the chair which I knocked one of my enemies stiff with. And it weren't my fault if one of 'em got blood all over the alley. All I'd done was break his nose and knock out 7 teeth with my fist. How'd I know he was going to fall in the alley and bleed on it? As for that section of wall which got knocked out, all I can say is it's a dern flimsy wall which can be wrecked by throwing a man through it. I thought I'd throwed him through a winder till I looked closer and seen it was a hole he busted through the wall. And can I help it if them scallywags blowed holes in the roof till it looked like a sieve trying to shoot me? It wasn't my fault nohow. But when the dust settled and I looked around to see if I'd made a clean sweep, I was just in time to grab the shotgun, which old man McVeigh was trying to shoot me through the barroom door with. "You ought to be ashamed," I reproved. "A man of your age and venerable whiskers, trying to shoot a defenseless stranger in the back." "But my bowling alley's wrecked," he wept, tearing the aforesaid whiskers. "I'm a ruined man. I sunk my wad in it, and now look at it." "Ah, well," I says, "it warn't my fault, but I can't see an honest man suffer. Here's $75, all I got." "'Tain't enough," says he, nevertheless making a grab for the dough like a kingfisher diving after a pollywog. "'Tain't near enough." "I'll collect the rest from them coyotes," I says. "Don't do it," he shuddered. "They'd kill me after you left." "I want to do the right thing," I says. "I'll work out the rest of it." He looked at me right sharp then and says, "Come into the bar." But I seen 3 of them was coming too, so I hauled 'em up and told 'em sternly to tote their friends out to the hoss trough and bring 'em too. They done so, kind of wabbling on their feet. They acted like they was still addled in the brains, and McVeigh said it looked to him like Middleton was out for the day. But I told him it was quite common for a man to be like that, which has just had a 15-pound bowling ball split into 2 over his head. Then I went into the bar with McVeigh, and he poured out the drinks. "Are you in earnest about working out that debt?" says he. "Sure," I said. "I always pays my debts, by fair means or foul." "Ain't you Breckinridge Elkins?" says he.
And when I says I was, he says, "I thought I recognized you when them fools was badgering you. Look out for them. That ain't all of 'em. The whole gang rode into town an hour or so ago and run the sheriff and his deputy out. But Buck didn't stay long. He seen his gal, then he pulled out for the hills again with 4 men. They's a couple more besides them you fit hanging round somewheres. I don't know where." "Outlaws?" I said. And he said, "Sure, but the local law force ain't strong enough to deal with 'em. And anyway, most of the folks in town is in cahoots with 'em and warns 'em if officers from outside come after 'em. They hang out in the hills ordinary, but they come into Red Cougar regular. But never mind them. I was just putting you on your guard. This is what I want you to do. A month ago I was coming back to Red Cougar with a tidy fortune in gold dust I'd panned back up in the hills, when I was held up and robbed. It weren't one of Ridgway's men. It was Three Fingers Clements, an old lone wolf, and the wust killer in these parts. He lives by hisself up in the hills and nobody knows where. But I just recent learned by accident. He sent a message by a sheep herder, and the sheep herder got drunk in my saloon and talked. I learned he's still got my gold and aims to sneak out with it as soon as he's jined by a gang of desperadoes from Tomahawk. It was them the sheep herder was taking the message to. I can't get no help from the sheriff. These outlaws has got him plumb buffaloed. I want you to ride up into the hills and get my gold. Of course, if you're scared of him—" "Who says I was scared of him or anybody else?" I demanded irritably. "Tell me how to get to his hideout and I'm on my way." McVeigh's eyes kind of gleamed and he says, "Good boy. Foller the trail that leads out of town to the northwest till you come to Diablo Canyon. Foller it till you come to the 5th Branch Gulch, opening into it on the right. Turn off the trail then and foller the gulch till you come to a big white oak tree nigh the left-hand wall. Climb up out of the gulch there and head due west up the slope. Pretty soon you'll see a crag like a chimney sticking out above a clump of spruces. At the foot of that crag they's a cave, and Clements is living there, and he's a tough old—" "It's as good as did," I assured him, and had another drink. Then went out and clumb aboard Cap'n Kidd and headed out of town. But as I rode past the last cabin on the left, I suddenly remembered about Sue Pritchard, and I allowed Three Fingers could wait long enough for me to pay my respects on her. Likely she was expecting me and getting nervous and impatient because I was so long coming. So I reined up to the stoop and hailed, and somebody looked at me through a winder. They also appeared to be a rifle muzzle trained on me, too, but who could blame folks for being cautious with them Ridgway coyotes in town? "Oh, it's you," said a female voice. Then the door opened and Sue Pritchard said, "Light and come in. Did you kill any of them rascals?" "I'm too soft-hearted for my own good," I says apologetically. "I just merely only sent 'em on down the road on foot. But I ain't got time to come in now. I'm on my way up in the mountains to see Three Fingers Clements. I aim to stop on my way back if it's agreeable with you." "Three Fingers Clements?" says she in a peculiar voice. "Do you know where he is?" "McVeigh told me," I said. "He's got a poke of dust he stole from McVeigh. I'm going after it." She said something under her breath which I must have misunderstood, because I was sure Miss Pritchard wouldn't use the word it sounded like. "Come in just a minute," she begged. "You got plenty of time. Come in and have a snort of corn juice. My folks is all visiting, and it gets mighty lonesome to a gal. Please come in." Well, I never could resist a purty gal, so I tied Cap'n Kidd to a stump that looked solid and went in. She brung out her old man's jug.
She said she never drunk none personal. We sat and talked, and there wasn't a doubt we cottoned to each other right spang off. There is some that says that Breckinridge Elkins hain't got a lick of sense when it comes to women folks, among these being my cousin, Bearfield Buckner. But I vow and declare that same is my only weakness, if any, and that likewise it is a manly weakness. This Sue Pritchard was plumb sensible, I seen. She wasn't one of these flighty kind that a feller would have to court with a banjo or a guitar. We talked round about bear traps and what was the best length barrel on shotguns and similar subjects of like nature. I likewise told her one or two of my mild experiences, and her eyes boogered big as saucers. We finally got around to my latest encounter. "Tell me some more about Three Fingers," she coaxed. "I didn't know anybody knowed his hideout." So I told her what all McVeigh said, and she was a heap interested, and had me repeat the instructions how to get there 2 or 3 times. Then she asked me if I'd met any bad men in town, and I told her I'd met 6, and they was now recovering on pallets in the back of the general store. She looked startled at this, and pretty soon she asked me to excuse her 'cause she heard one of the neighbor women calling her. I didn't hear nobody, but I said all right, and she went out the back door, and I heard her whistle 3 times. I sot there and had another snort or so, and reflected that the gal was undoubtedly taken with me. She was gone quite a spell, and finally I got up and looked out the back winder and seen her standing down by the corral talking to a couple of fellers. As I looked, one of 'em got on a bobtailed roan and headed north at a high run, and the other'n come on back to the cabin with Sue. "This here's my cousin, Jack Montgomery," says she. "He wants to go with you. He's just a boy and likes excitement." He was about the hardest looking boy I ever seen, and he seemed remarkable mature for his years. But I said, "All right, but we gotta get going." "Be careful, Breckinridge," she advised. "You too, Jack." "I won't hurt Three Fingers no more'n I got to," I promised her. And we went on our way yonderly, headed for the hideout. We got to Diablo Canyon in about an hour, and went up it about 3 miles till we come to the gulch mouth McVeigh had described. All at once Jack Montgomery pulled up and pinted down to a pool we was passing in a holler of the rock, and hollered, "Look there! Gold dust scattered at the edge of the water." "I don't see none," I says. "Light," he urged, taking off his cayuse. "I see it. It's thick as butter along the edge." Well, I got down and bent over the pool, but I couldn't see nothing, and all at once something hit me in the back of the head and knocked my hat off. I turned around and seen Jack Montgomery holding the bent barrel of a Winchester carbine in his hands. The stock was busted off, and pieces was lying on the ground. He looked awful surprised about something. His eyes was wild, and his hair stood up. "Are you sick?" I asked. "What you want to hit me for?" "You ain't human!" he gasped, dropping the bent barrel and jerking out his pistol. I grabbed him and taken it away from him. "What's the matter with you?" I demanded. "Are you locoed?" For answer he run off down the canyon, shrieking like a lost soul. I decided he must have went crazy like sheepherders does sometimes, so I pursued him and catched him. He fit and hollered like a painter. "Stop that!" I told him sternly. "I'm your friend. It's my duty to your cousin to see you don't come to no harm." "Cousin hell!" says he with frightful profanity. "She ain't no more my cousin than you be." "Poor feller," I sighed, and throwing him on his belly, reached for his lariat. "You're out of your head and suffering from hallucinations. I knowed a sheepherder just like you onct, only he thought he was Sitting Bull." "What you doing?" he hollered as I started tying him with his rope. Don't you worry, I soothed him. I can't let you go tearing round over these mountains in your condition. I'll fix you so's you'll be safe and comfortable till I get back from Three Fingers Cave. Then I'll take you to Red Cougar and we'll send you to some nice, quiet, insane asylum."
"Blast your soul!" he shrieked. "I'm as sane as you be. A damn sight saner, because no man with a normal brain could ignore getting a rifle stock broke over his skull like you done."
Whereupon he tries to kick me between the eyes and otherwise give evidence of what I once heard a doctor call his derangement. It was a pitiful sight to see, especially since he was a cousin to Miss Sue Pritchard and would undoubtedly be my cousin-in-law one of these days. He jerked and wrastled, and some of his words was downright shocking. But I didn't pay no attention to his ravings. I always heard the way to get along with crazy people was to humor 'em. I was afeared if I left him laying on the ground the wolves might chaw him, so I tied him up in the crotch of a big tree where they couldn't reach him. I likewise tied his hoss by the pool where he could drink and graze.
"Listen,"
Jack begged as I clumb onto Captain Kidd.
"I give up. Untie me and I'll spill the beans. I'll tell you everything."
"You just take it easy," I soothed. "I'll be back soon."
"Expletive deleted,"
says he, frothing slightly at the mouth. With a sigh of pity, I turned up the gulch, and his language, till I was clean out of sight, ain't to be repeated. A mile or so on, I come to the white oak tree and clumb out of the gulch and went up a long slope till I seen a jut of rock like a chimney rising above the trees. I slid off of Captain Kidd and drawed my pistols and snuck forward through the thick brush till I seen the mouth of a cave ahead of me, and I also seen something else too. A man was lying in front of it with his head in a pool of blood. I rolled him over, and he was still alive. His scalp was cut open, but the bone didn't seem to be caved in. He was a lanky old coot with reddish-gray whiskers, and he didn't have but 3 fingers onto his left hand. There was a pack tore up and scattered on the ground nigh him, but I reckon the pack mule had run off. They was also hoss tracks leading west. They was a spring nearby, and I brung my hat full of water and sloshed it into his face and tried to pour some into his mouth, but it warn't no go. When I throwed the water over him, he kind of twitched and groaned, but when I tried to pour the water down his gullet, he kind of instinctively clamped his jaws together like a bulldog. Then I seen a jug setting in the cave, so I brung it out and pulled out the cork. When it popped, he opened his mouth convulsively and reached out his hand. So I poured a pint or 2 down his gullet, and he opened his eyes and glared wildly around till he seen his busted pack. Then he clutched his whiskers and shrieked,
"They got it! My polka dust! I've been hiding up here for weeks, and just when I was gonna make a jump for it, they finds me."
"Who?" I asked.
"Buck Ridgway and his gang," he squalled. "I was keerless. When I heard hosses, I thought it was the men which was coming to help me take my gold out. Next thing I knowed, Ridgway's bunch had run out of the brush and was beating me over the head with their colts. I'm a ruined man."
"Hell's fire!" quoth I with passion. "Them Ridgways was beginning to get onto my nerves." I left old man Clements howling his woes to the sky like a timber wolf with the bellyache, and I forked Captain Kidd and headed west. They'd left a trail the youngest kid on Bear Creek could foller. It led for 5 miles through as wild a country as I ever seen outside the Humboldts. Then I seen a cabin ahead on a wide benchland, and that backed agin a steep mountain slope. I could just see the chimney through the tops of a dense thicket. It warn't long till sundown, and smoke was coming out of the chimney. I knowed it must be the Ridgway hideout, so I went busting through the thicket in such a hurry I forgot they might have a man on the lookout. I'm powerful absent-minded that way. They was one all right, but I was coming so fast he missed me with his buffalo gun, and he didn't stop to reload, but run into the cabin yelling, "Bar the door quick! Here comes the biggest man in the world on the biggest hoss in creation!" They done so. When I emerged from amongst the trees, they opened up on me through the loopholes with sawed-off shotguns. If it'd been Winchesters, I'd have ignored 'em, but even I'm a little bashful about buckshot at close range when 6 men is shooting at me all at once. So I retired behind a big tree and begun to shoot back with my pistols, and the howls of them worthless critters when my bullets knocked splinters in their faces was music to my ears. They was a corral some distance behind the cabin with 6 hosses in it. To my surprise, I seen one of 'em was a bobtailed roan the feller was riding which I seen talking with Sue Pritchard and Jack Montgomery, and I wondered if them blame outlaws had captured him. But I warn't accomplishing much shooting at them loopholes, and the sun dipped lower, and I begun to get mad. I decided to rush the cabin anyway, and to hell with their derned buckshot, and I dismounted and stumped my toe right severe on a rock. It always did madden me to stump my toe, and I uttered some loud and profane remarks, and I reckon them scoundrels must have thunk I'd stopped some lead, the way they whooped. But just then I had an inspiration. A big thick smoke was pouring out of the rock chimney, so I knowed they was a big fire on the fireplace where they was cooking supper. And I was sure there weren't but one door in the cabin, so I taken up the rock, which was about the size of an ordinary pig, and throwed it at the chimney. Boys on Bear Creek is ashamed if they have to use more'n one rock on a squirrel in a 100-foot tree across the creek, and I didn't miss. I hit her center, and she buckled and come crashing down in a regular shower of rocks, and most of 'em fell down into the fireplace, as I knowed by the way the sparks flew. I judged that the coals was scattered all over the floor, and the chimney hole was blocked so the smoke couldn't get out that way. Anyway, the smoke began to pour out the winders, and the Ridgewayers stopped shooting and started hollering. Somebody yelled, "The floor's on fire! Throw that bucket of water on it!" And someone else shrieked, "Wait, you damn fool! That ain't water, it's whiskey!" But he was too late. I heard the splash, and then a most amazing flame sprung up and licked out of the winders, and the fellers hollered louder'n ever and yelled, "Let me out! I got smoke in my eyes! I'm choking to death!" I left the thicket and run to the door just as a man throwed it open and staggered out, blind as a bat and cussing and shooting wild. I was afeared he'd hurt himself if he kept tearing around like that, so I taken his shotgun away from him and bent the barrel over his head to kind of keep him quiet. Then I seen to my surprise he was the feller which rode the bobtail roan. I thunk how surprised Sue'd be to know a friend of hern was a cussed outlaw. I then went into the cabin, which was so full of smoke and gunpowder fumes a man couldn't hardly see nothing. The walls and roof was on fire by now, and them idiots was tearing around with their eyes full of smoke, trying to find the door, and one of 'em run head on into the wall and knocked himself stiff. I throwed him outside and got hold of another and to lead him out, and he cut me across the bosom with his bowie. I was so stung by this ingratitude that when I tossed him out to safety I maybe throwed him further'n I aimed to, and it appears they was a stump which he hit his head on. But I couldn't help it being there. I then turned around and located the remaining 3, which was fighting with each other, evidently thinking they was fighting me. Just as I started for 'em, a big log fell out of the roof and knocked 2 of 'em groggy and sot their clothes on fire, and a regular sheet of flame sprung up and burnt off most of my hair, and whilst I was dazzled by it, the surviving outlaw run past me out the door, leaving his smoking shirt in my hand. Well, I dragged the other two out and stomped on 'em to put out the fire, and the way they hollered you'd 'a' thought I was injuring 'em instead of saving their fool lives. "Shet up and tell me where the gold is," I ordered, and one of 'em gurgled, "Ridgway's got it." I asked which one of 'em was him, and they all swore they wasn't, and I remembered the feller which run out of the cabin. So I looked round and seen him just leading the hoss out of the corral to ride off bareback. "You stop!" I roared, letting my voice out full, which I seldom does. The acorns rattled down out of the trees, and the tall grass bent flat, and the hoss Ridgway was fixing to mount got scart and jerked away from him and bolted, and the other hosses knocked the corral gate down and stampeded. 3 or 4 of them run over Ridgway before he could get out of the way. He jumped up and headed out across the flat on foot, wabbling some but going strong. I could have shot him easy, but I was afeared he'd hid the gold somewheres, and if I killed him he couldn't tell me where. So I run and got my lariat and taken out after him on foot, because I figured he'd duck into the thick brush to get away. But when he seen I was overhauling him, he made for the mountainside and begun to climb a steep slope. I follered him, but before he was much more than halfway up, he'd taken refuge on a ledge behind a dead tree and started shooting at me. I got behind a boulder about 75 foot below him and asked him to surrender like a gent, but his only reply was a direct slur on my ancestry and more bullets, one of which knocked off a sliver of rock which gouged my neck. This annoyed me so much that I pulled my pistols and started shooting back at him. But all I could hit was the tree, and the sun was going down, and I was afeared if I didn't get him before dark, he'd manage to sneak off. So I stood up, paying no attention to the slug he put in my shoulder, and swung my lariat. I always uses a 90-foot rope. I got no use for them little bitsy pieces of string most punchers uses. I throwed my noose and looped that tree and sot my feet solid and heaved and tore the dern tree up by the roots. But them roots went so deep, most of the ledge come along with 'em, and that started a landslide. The first thing I knowed, here comes the tree and Ridgway and several tons of loose rock and shale, gathering weight and speed as they come. It sounded like thunder rolling down the mountain, and Ridgway's screams was frightful to hear. I jumped out from behind the boulder, intending to let the landslide split on me and grab him as it went past me, but I stumbled and fell, and that darn tree hit me behind the ear, and the next thing I knowed I was traveling down the mountain with Ridgway and the rest of the avalanche. It was very humiliating. I was right glad at the time, I recollect, that Miss Sue Pritchard wasn't nowheres near to witness this catastrophe. It's hard for a man to keep his dignity, I found, when he's scooting in a hell slew of trees and brush and rocks and dirt, and I become aware, too, that a snag had tore the seat out of my pants, which makes me some despondent. This, I figured, is what a man gets for losing his self-control. I recollected another time or two when I'd exposed myself to the consequences by exerting my full strength, and I made me a couple of promises then and there. It's all right for a single young feller to go helling around and let the chips fall where they may, but it's different with a man like me who was almost just the same as practically married. You got to look before you leap was the way I reckoned it. A man's got to think of his wife and children. We brung up at the foot of the slope in a heap of boulders and shale, and I throwed a few 100 pounds of busted rock off of me and riz up and shaking the blood out of my eyes and looked around for Ridgway. I presently located a boot sticking out of the heap, and I laid hold onto it and hauled him out. He looked remarkable like a skint rabbit. About all the clothes he had left onto him besides his boots was his belt, and I seen a fat buckskin poke stuck under it. So I dragged it out, and about that time he sot up groggy and looked round dizzy and moaned feeble. "Who the hell are you?" "Breckinridge Elkins of Bear Creek," I said. "And with all the men they is in the state of Nevada," he says weakly, "I had to tangle with you. What you gonna do?" "I think I'll turn you and your gang over to the sheriff," I says. "I don't hold much with law. We ain't never had none on Bear Creek. But sech coyotes as you all don't deserve no better." "A hell of a right you got to talk about law," he said fiercely, "after plotting with Badger McVeigh to rob old man Clements. That's all I done." "What you mean?" I demanded. "Clements robbed McVeigh of this here dust." "Robbed, hell!" says Ridgway. "McVeigh is the crookedest cuss that ever lived, only he ain't got the guts to commit robbery hisself. Why, Clements is an honest miner, the old jackass, and he panned that there dust up in the hills. He's been hiding for weeks, scared to try to get out of the country. We was hunting him too industrious." "McVeigh put me up to committing robbery?" I ejaculated, aghast. "That's just what he did," declared Ridgway, "and I was so overcome by this perfidy I was plumb paralyzed." Before I could recover, Ridgway gave a convulsive flop and rolled over into the bushes and was gone in an instant. The next thing I knowed, I heard hosses running, and I turned in time to see a bunch of men riding up on me. Old man Clements was with 'em, and I recognized the others as the fellers I stopped from chasing Sue Pritchard on the road below Red Cougar. I reached for a pistol, but Clements yelled, "Hold on! They're friends!" He then jumped off and grabbed the poke out of my limp hand and waved it at them triumphantly. "See that?" he hollered. "Didn't I tell you he was a friend? Didn't I tell you he come up here to bust up that gang? He got my gold back for me, just like I said he would." He then grabbed my hand and shaked it, energetic, and says, "These is the men I sent to Tomahawk for, to help me get my gold out. They got to my cave just a while after you left. They're prejudiced agin you, but—" "No, we ain't," denied Yaller Whiskers, which I now seen was wearing a deputy's badge, and he got off and shaken my hand heartily. "You didn't know we was special law officers, and I reckon it did look bad, 6 men chasing a woman. We thought you was a outlaw. We was pretty mad at you when we finally caught our horses and headed back, but I begun to wonder about you when we found them 6 disabled outlaws in the store at Red Cougar. Then when we got to Clements' cave and found you'd befriended him and had lit out on Ridgway's trail, it looked still better for you. But I still thought maybe you was after that gold on your own account. But of course I see now I was all wrong, and I apologizes. Where's Ridgway?" "He got away," I said. "Never mind," says Clements, pumping my hand again. "Kirby here and his men has got Jeff Middleton and 5 more men in the jail at Red Cougar. McVeigh, the old hypocrite, taken to the hills when Kirby rode into town, and we got 6 more of Ridgway's gang tied up over at Ridgway's cabin, or where it was till you burned it down. They're sure a battered mob. It must have been a awful fight. You look like you been through a tornado yourself. Come on with us and our prisoners to Tomahawk. I buys you a new suit of clothes, and we celebrates." "I got to get a feller I left tied up in a tree down the gulch," I said. "Jack Montgomery. He's at Loco Weed or something. He's crazy." They laughed hearty, and Kirby says, "You got a great sense of humor, Elkins. We found him when we come up the gulch and brung him on with us. He's tied up with the rest of them back there. You sure was slick, fooling McVeigh into telling you where Clemens was hiding, and fooling that whole Ridgeway gang into thinking you aimed to rob Clemens. Too bad you didn't know we was officers so we could have worked together. But I gotta laugh when I think how McVeigh thought he was chipping you into stealing for him, and all the time you was just studying how to rescue Clemens and bust up Ridgway's gang. Ha ha ha!" "But I didn't," I begun dizzily because my head was swimming. "You just made one mistake," said Kirby, "and that was when you let slip where Clemens was hiding." "But I never told nobody but Sue Pritchard," I says wildly. "Many a good man has been euchred by a woman," says Kirby tolerantly. "We got the whole yarn from Montgomery. The minute you told her, she snuck out and called in two of Ridgway's men and sent one of 'em fogging it to tell Buck where to find Clemens, and she sent the other'n, which was Montgomery, to go along with you and lay you out before you could get there. She lit for the hills when we come into Red Cougar, and I bet her and Ridgway are streaking it over the mountains together right now. But that ain't your fault. You didn't know she was Buck's gal. The perfidy of women!" "Gimme my hoss," I said groggily. "I've been scorched and shot and cut and fell on by a avalanche, and my honest love has been betrayed. You sees before you the singed, skint, and blood-soaked result of female treachery. Fate has dealt me the joker. My heart is busted, and the seat is tore out of my pants. Get out of the way. I'm riding." "Where to?" they asked, awed. "Anywheres," I bellers, "just so it's far away from Red Cougar." End of Evil Deeds at Red Cougar.